Leah, it is so wonderful to finally connect with you. I feel like we've kind of been orbiting each other out in the art ethos. So
For a
I'm
long
really thrilled to have you on
time.
the show.
It's
Yes, yes.
such a delight to spend Friday morning with you.
Oh, me too. Me too. To everybody listening, Leah was in Boston for quite some time, as was I, and just so many overlaps, not only from that, but just from being in the art world for so long, that it's been great to catch up. And I can't wait to share more of your work, your writing, everything you're doing with our listeners. So thanks again, Leah, for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me, and right back at you. One of my very favorite shows at Piano Craft Gallery, what you curated. So it's wonderful to finally meet.
Thank you. Thank you. I loved that show. There was so many incredible artists, including actually a Philly artist who I'll have to send you their information now that
Please.
you're in Philly, who does incredible work with reflection in glass. So yeah.
Oh, amazing. Love it.
um, all right, Leah. So the way I really love to start these
Mhm.
conversations is just getting like a brief background on you and where you're from and how you
Mhm.
first started to become interested in the arts.
Mhm. Well, I grew up in a small town in Southern Virginia, about an hour east of Richmond. And I was really fortunate that I went to schools that had great arts programming, and all the disciplines, and was really kind of encouraged to explore that as a kid, and just always really, honestly, really wanted to be an artist. Um, but by the time I was in high school, I really realized I didn't have a lot of technical skill, nor did I really want to spend time. I mean, I figured this out later, but at the time I didn't totally get that. I just didn't want to spend time developing that. But I really loved being in the studio. I loved looking at work. I loved talking about work, thinking about work. So that coupled with, having been to museums, and having access that way, I got on the art history track. And I really kind of never looked back. But I think that's always been important to me. I love being in the studio. I love just the dynamism of being in the studio and seeing process unfold, and kind of like ideas get worked out. That is so much part of, what I do every day.
Mm.
I worked lots of jobs, and I had lots of internships. My first internship was at 1708 Gallery in Richmond, which is still around, and they do amazing artist run space. And that was also really, like, looking back, that's also really important to me because I love an artist run space. I love the ethos. I love what can happen in that environment. Yeah, then I made my way to New York, and then I was in Boston, and now here I am talking to you from Philadelphia.
Oh, I love it. I love this. I what I really enjoy hearing is, how within the arts we all have our different kind of talents and interests. And
Hmm.
so, like, your ability to research and write about artwork and love being in the studio and your love
Hmm.
of artist spaces, which is something that you and I share, is
Hmm.
both of those things, being in a space where something's being made or artists are presenting work, I think is just
Hmm.
really interesting to me. And I know you've been involved in so many different curatorial projects, and currently you are the director of exhibitions and contemporary curatorial initiatives at PAFA. And also, congratulations, you're the 2024 Mary Ann Unger Estate Fellow.
Hmm.
That's so cool. Like,
Thank
tell us
you.
about this
Thank
stuff.
you.
Like,
Yeah, well, I think just talking about PAFA for a second, you know, I saw the job and was really interested in it. But what really really attracted me to the institution was, I was working in an organization called Now and There in Boston, which is now the Triennial, doing temporary site-specific public art projects. Which in that organization is now 8 years old. I was there for about 5 of those years. I started and worked on a lot of different kind of like webzines. I'm dating myself a little bit. I've done a lot of independent curatorial projects and like different pop-up spaces. So I was always really, I would say, was active in things that are more, there was like a present tense, there's immediacy to it. So I was interested in PAFA because it was founded in 1805, and it's one of the oldest arts institutions in the country. But so I was interested in that and just like, what would that be like to work in that context instead of something that is so of the present, or wanting to be of the present. And this institution, PAFA, wants to be of the present and really has always been of the present because it's always been a place where artists are trained. But what this is all a long way of saying is like, I was fascinated that the institution was founded by an artist, Charles Wilson Peale, which, we certainly cannot say, he's contemporary, but, he was in his day and he was thinking, he and others wrote the first mission statement and said that PAFA should be a place for the cultivation of the fine arts. And that kind of again, this dynamism and this activity, this like looking to the present moment was fascinating to me. Like, what is it like to think about one of the oldest arts institutions in the country as actually like an artist founded space? So that is something I also try to bring to every program that we're developing, and there's, a lot going on, but I try to bring that sensibility to the work that we do, whether it's, putting together a budget or writing, a label, or certainly, having a conversation with an artist. And then the writing, I really got into curatorial. I went to grad school and started writing. I've always loved writing, and I've always wanted to continue to develop that skill. And I still it gives me my greatest joy to feel like I've put together, a better sentence or a better paragraph than I have before. But I, had this idea when I got out of grad school, like, oh, maybe I'll be an arts writer. And I quickly found out that is only really, you're never going to make money doing that. You'll make like a couple, like, oh, here's $50. Take yourself out for a drink or an ice cream. So I was really, that didn't, I was fortunate, I started working full time and really fundraising at different museums. Long story short, I have always loved writing and to continue building that craft, and but really want to be focused again on being in studios with artists. And I saw Marianne Unger passed away sadly in 1998, but left an incredible body of work that her family is active in stewarding. There was an incredible show at Williams College a couple of years ago, curated by Horace Ballard, and that insight into the work that led me to write about it, and that led to a longer conversation with Marianne's family. Her daughter is Eve Biddle, who's one of the co-founders of Mosaic Project in New York. And so I was also, I am very intrigued by this idea that Marianne's legacy and this life that she and her husband Jeffrey Biddle built in their studio still very much continues today in the work that Eve is doing. And I think that Marianne's generation of, women, feminist artists, makers are very much set the conditions for my generation, our generation, I think, of makers to come up. So anyway, I am getting to spend time in Marianne's studio. It's still, her estate is housed in the studio in New York, so I can go there and look through journals and look at work, and just, it honestly, even saying this out loud, it's just such an amazing experience to be in a place where someone made the work. Their presence is still so much there, and I can see kind of this pathway into how they developed a creative life. And I get to think about that and write about that. I'm still in progress with what I'm writing, so if it sounds kind of iterative and fluid, it certainly is. But that, I will say too, going back to what we were talking about before, I love thinking about what makes somebody go into a studio every day and look at something and create something, articulate something. And it doesn't have to be even material. It could be just a gesture. What is the psychology behind that? And how does that inform how you then build your life? And we were talking about that a little bit before. It's how do you, maintain this, how do you maintain?
This is all so exciting and hyping me up. I want to go paint right now, hearing all of this about,
yes,
yeah, being in that space has got to be incredible to
Mm-hmm.
see that.
It
And
really is.
I mean, that's just amazing. Also, I didn't realize the connection with the Wasaic project, which I've
Mm-hmm.
interviewed Will before on here. And I didn't know that. That's so cool to hear
Yeah.
about, you know?
Yes.
Um, and I just love this drive that you have for artist spaces inhabited by artists, by makers,
Mm-hmm.
creators, visionaries,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I think that's really special and seems like it's core in a lot of ways to what you want to be thinking about, writing about. I
Mm-hmm.
also know that at PAFA that you were involved with a show that had Miriam Shapiro in it. And I'm a big Miriam Shapiro
I'm a
fan.
big fan too. Yes, we can have a whole conversation about that, I'm sure.
I love that. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and what you wrote about her in terms of that show and curating it?
Yeah, well, we're very, very fortunate. PAFA has a long history of collecting women artists, training women artists, going back to the 19th century. And we had an incredible gift about 10 years ago from a collector here, Linda Lee Alter, of works by women that she's collected. And there was a lot of, we're very fortunate, there's a lot of Miriam Shapiro work from that gift. And we've also acquired Miriam Shapiro in other ways. It's, you know, I think a lot of people just immediately associate Miriam Shapiro with either, you know, Women's House, with the project she did with Judy Chicago in California in 1970, or with, you know, actually refreshingly more and more pattern and decoration, which it's exciting to see that movement get really kind of unpacked and explored in recent years. But the show that I was really very fortunate to be able to co-curate with our former chief curator, who's now at the Toledo Museum of Art, Anna Marley, so early in my tenure at PAFA, was called Artists as Cultivators. And it was very much informed and inspired by this initial or inaugural mission statement from PAFA from 1805 as a place for cultivation of the fine arts in the United States. And I should say that too, is like PAFA is very, the history is very embedded in the idea of nation building, you know, how arts are marshaled as an operative of nation building. So we got to explore that. And certainly, you know, we have a really amazing landscape painting collection from the 18th, 19th century, early 20th century, which is, you know, very embedded in that. Anyway, the show is really kind of a precursor to the big project that we are working on now, which is the reinstallation of the permanent collection to reopen the building, the historic landmark building designed by Frank Furness, opened in 1876 for the centennial of the United States. Yeah, that's going to open in 2026. Artists as Cultivators, I'm really bouncing around a lot, just going to have to really edit.
It's great. This is great. It all makes sense. And I really love this idea of this permanent collection that is going to be put together in 2026. I mean, that sounds like
Yeah,
a really big
it's a big project.
yeah, yeah. And that it's going to
Mhm.
probably have an incredible reception. I mean, you know,
Well, that's what we're hoping and planning for. And, you know, artists like, I would love to highlight artists that, like Miriam Shapiro, that are maybe still very under-recognized and not immediately associated with our collection. Similar to Marianne Unger, I mean, they're of the same generation. I think that you know, second wave feminist movement has really stylistically, materially, thematically, politically, that all really has set, I think no matter what kind of work you're making, that ethos of collaboration and kind of doing what you can with very little and having to wear multiple hats and cultivating, you know, conversations around each other. I think that is very much part of our art world today, or certainly part of the art world that I want to be in and feel part of. So
mm,
I really I just want to see that generation more fully recognized. One of my dreams projects is to write a long form something, probably an article about that generation in that moment, and how it's really ushered in by people like Ingrid Shishi at Art Forum in the early 80s, who really did away with the siloing between certainly different disciplines, and brought in things like fashion and film and just like a whole comprehensive lifestyle, like into a place like art, a bastion of criticism like Art Forum. And what does that do to the art world, and how do we see that still showing up today? I think cynically we could say, that is like also ushered in the spectacle, the selfie era in a way that maybe was never anticipated in the early 80s. But I think maybe less cynically, it's really created a condition where there can be like a broadening and expansiveness that is really necessary.
Mm, I love this. And I love what you're saying about how this really ushered in the idea of collaboration, wearing multiple hats. Like these women were doing it. And again, I am so thankful. I know I have been able to have the type of life that I'm currently inhabiting because of these women artists and what they were doing, what they were talking about, Um, so I just love that you were working on this. And Miriam Shapiro, like I said, I'm just really interested in her paintings, in her surfaces, and what she was doing.
Oh my gosh. And with collage or
Oh,
fromage,
yeah,
like,
yeah, the fromages. Yeah, you I had a conversation about fromages with Melissa Meyer, who I was her studio assistant in New York, and she actually worked with Miriam Shapiro on heresies. Um,
oh, cool.
yeah, yeah, I have like a heresies poster in my house now from that. Like it's an original
That's
print. Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. And she was talking about the conversation she was having with Miriam and like when fromages basically became a thing. Like it was,
Mm-hmm.
and that was, to be honest, such an education for me working
Mm-hmm.
for this artist who had gone through so much, was part of these conversations. Yeah, she's incredible. And this kind of leads me to my next question. You have these interests that you are beginning, you write about, you're curating about. And we had this question from one of our works members who
Mm-hmm.
is interested in, like, when you're curating an exhibition, do you start with the space, the concept, specific works of art, or something else entirely? Like, can you give us an insight into how you start that process?
Ooh. I would say it's different for every project. It's different for every project. Sometimes I really start with the artist, and think about, um, yeah, conversations that they're having in their work, formally or thematically. But even as I'm saying this, I'm also thinking, I think about display all the time. I think about not only the logistics of display, so how things would actually hang or attach or install, but also how people would experience them. So I guess space is a huge part of it. And even as we're talking, like the PAFA galleries in the historic building, which are not white cubes, they're very much like a honeycomb. Incredible to curate and really challenging in a way that I never expected, because I've really not been outside of, I've done a lot of like storefront projects, but it's more or less you're always in a white cube. And I think about, from doing public art, when I was doing public art in Boston, I thought about a lot, like what makes the person stop and take a second look at the thing you've put out into the world in their park that they walk through every day. What makes them stop when it's a Tuesday at 3 o'clock and it's starting to rain and they need to get home, but like and they've walked by through this park 1,000 times, but like what makes them stop for like a minute? And there's a lot of, certainly there's a politic to that, because you're putting something in someone's space without you're putting something in someone's space, and you have to negotiate that and be really respectful and considerate of, maybe they, hopefully you already had a conversation with them, and kind of how they would come to the work, but oftentimes people aren't asked in public art, and things just kind of appear, which is hugely problematic. But so I think that also comes into my mind in working within a museum context or a gallery context. The people coming into your exhibition, like they didn't make a choice. Like they did come in through an entryway. Which is all that to say is that I think about how people are going to experience things. One of the hugely influential ideas for me in curatorial work has been an article by the theorist Gita Kapoor. And it is in Apex's Cautionary Tales book, which is a little, highly recommend, but little anthology, different thinkers on curatorial work. And I'm going to probably botch this, but she thinks about how exhibitions might unfold as an itinerary. And I'm really paraphrasing what she's saying there. But I think about that a lot, like what is the itinerary? How are things unfolding? How are things coming back? Like what is the actual experience of going through an exhibition that doesn't have to be progressive, it doesn't have to be linear, but there is a throughway. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it really depends on it depends on the artist, their idea and their space. So I think it's all kind of very specific. I really want to be, when I work with an artist, I want to be, not to sound overly idealistic, but I want to be creating with you. I want to be making with you. So I try to find ways to do that.
I really love that. Creating with you, like it becomes this partnership of sorts, where it's not just one, it's like we're both relying on each other, to talk about the work, to talk about the space, to talk about how people experience, like you said, that flow, and how that can not inform people, but give them an experience and they can take something away, like it adds to their experience
right
in life. So I have another question that came up. This is from Lisa Wagner, and she was wondering, what draws you to particular artists or pieces when you're curating a show? Specifically, so I guess my question is, what draws you to particular artists or pieces when you're curating? And her question becomes more of how much does websites and social medias come into play? Like that, is that something that you ever look at or are thinking about additionally?
I will say websites and I would say actually social media comes into play hugely for me. Maybe I should be embarrassed, but I spend a lot of time on Instagram and I spend a lot of time looking at work on Instagram. Documentation matters. Even if it's just, you're submitting to a juried show and you don't think you need to spend so much time on it. Yes, you do. But I know documentation is expensive. I mean, that's something I'm happy to talk more and more about, of like, some of these things are just like very prohibitive for people. Yeah, social media definitely matters. I think your website also matters. I will say I tend not to read anything. I always look at the work first, and then if I'm interested, then I'll go back and read the statement, read the bio. And I also feel like the trick with websites or social media is like you want to give people enough of a taste so they're interested, but yet you want to like make them actually come and see it in person or ask you for a studio visit, which is, hard. In terms of the work I like, this is such a hard question for me because I feel like, especially in the museum world, I should have like a specialty. And I guess, my specialty has tended to be, the projects I've done has tended to be, artists from the 80s on. And I've done a lot, I've done, new media, craft adjacent work. So I guess I could say time-based or duration is really important to me, but it's really all about like there has to have a gesture and a presence that's really, really clearly articulated. And I know that's not super helpful to say, but I like work that's like there's a sincerity to it. And materiality is really important. I love kind of the sensuality of materiality. Again, just thinking about what is it like to put something out into the world that no one asked you for, but you had to put it out into the world. I am always attracted to that conversation. That being said, I mean, there's nothing better than just like a really sumptuous painting show. I love being in the studio with painters. I love, how, formally just how things can converge on a flat surface. So I like it all.
I love it. That makes me so happy to hear, like the materiality, sincerity, having a presence,
Mhm.
like I think that is like one of the most incredible things when you're in front of a piece and
Mhm.
there's that other thing, that presence, where the pieces come together
Mhm.
and just elevate it for the person, for the viewer. So yeah, love all the things there. And I really loved hearing you talk about public art as well, because I
Mhm.
think that's really interesting. I haven't had in-depth conversations with as many curators who have done public art. And so I just thought it was interesting how you mentioned like somebody makes a choice to walk into an exhibition. They don't
Mhm.
make a choice to always walk by well, we hope they make a choice, but it could
That's
be
the
a
goal.
daily commute. Yeah, it could
Yeah.
be a daily commute or something like that. And I've had a lot of artists come to me wanting to begin to explore public
Mhm.
artwork and making public artwork. So I was wondering if you could talk um, a little bit about how artists can get into it. And I also have an additional question with public artwork, and I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it, which is there can be really great public artwork. Like I think Boston has some really great public artwork. And
It's
then
getting
there's
there.
then there's like public artwork that is not really hitting all those levels that we would like. And I'm wondering why that is the case. So, first question, I guess, is suggestions you have for artists who want to get into it. And second is,
Mhm.
why is there kind of a lot of bad public artwork that comes into the world sometimes?
Okay, how much time do we have? I'm gonna answer the first one first. Um, Getting into public art is really hard. I'm so happy that I had the experience of curating public artworks. It's incredibly challenging, logistically, materially, and I think emotionally. Certainly for artists, but as a curator too, presenting something that is going to be interacted with on a in the elements, like in the weather, and also be interacted with by people, and people are going to have responses to it really quickly. That's exhilarating, but it's also can be really, it can be really challenging. And I think as a public artist, you are emotionally challenged on your work and why you're making it, unlike any other venue. I think in general, and I'm going to hugely generalize here, so everyone forgive me in podcast land. Artists and curators, we're all trained to really complicate things, to make things harder for people to understand. Again, I'm generalizing here. We want of course, we want there to be intrigue, and we want there to be mystery, and we want there to be obviously, a lot of rigor intellectually. But I think with that, we are comfortable presenting something that we don't want you to understand it immediately all the time. But with public art, you need people to be able to have some sort of spark of understanding pretty immediately. So when you're in front of the panel at City Hall and they're like, "Why are you doing this?" And um, we don't get this, we think this is dumb. Like people will say that. And you have to, first of all, be able to take that, which I think a lot of artists can from being trained in art schools. It's not easy. But you have to be ready to take that, and you have to be ready to certainly like not dumb it down. Like the general, like people are so brilliant. So I don't want to sound like that, but what I'm saying is that you have to be willing to think about accessibility in a way that is unlike anything that you've thought before. You need to think about how many different community groups and subjectivities would interact with this and come to it, and really be okay with if they don't like it. you need to be okay with if you're outdoors and in a public park, for instance, you know, you need to like go, first of all, you should go there and sit there like at every hour of the day, sunrise, lunchtime, sunset, dinner time, you know, be safe. But, you know, for instance, I want to do our project in the Charlestown Navy Yard. And Now and There, we did do some really incredible projects. My last projects with Now and There were with Samantha Fields, and Gata Amir in the Charlestown Navy Yard. But I had wanted to do a project on a pier in the Charlestown Navy Yard in Boston, which is going out into the harbor. Long story short, one of the things I learned going there, kind of at dusk or after dark, was that there was a huge group of people fishing, doing night fishing. And if we had cited this particular work on that pier, it would have completely disrupted that. Anyway, I'm rambling, but there wasn't organized. Like there was no like pier fishing group, Facebook group, or like any kind of, like the city didn't really know about, like they knew about it, but there was no one I could go to and say like, hey, would you guys mind if we did this? Or like, what would this mean? You know, coupled with that is that when I went to the, me and a couple of our colleagues, like we went to the group, most of us were monolingual. There was Spanish being spoken, Vietnamese being spoken, Chinese being spoken, but not a lot in English. And that was like a huge barrier. So ultimately the project did not go there. It's definitely for the best. But that's just, I raise that as an example of like, I wouldn't, had we not been trying to think about what would it be like at night, we wouldn't have realized that fishing community was there.
That's fascinating to me. That is incredibly fascinating. And I think this is so helpful for many artists who are interested in getting into more of a public art sector, which is, you know, like this idea, like it does have to be digestible at a different pace.
It's a different, that's exactly what I mean. It had to be
Yeah.
digestible at a different pace,
Yeah.
not digestible, but yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no. This is fascinating to me because I hadn't thought of it that way, you know,
Mhm.
but it has to be delivered differently. And then this idea of going to the space at different times to understand what you could disrupt and how terrible that could kind of be, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, we want to go in and do something wonderful, and then it ends up having this like different impact.
Mhm.
That I think is such great information to hear
Good.
for artists who want to be getting in there. And I think that also kind of begins to answer the question of why is there a lot of quote unquote, and I don't want to say this like artists out there who have done public art, please don't think I'm saying bad
Mhm.
things about your work. It's just that there has been, you know, in the past, artwork that doesn't tend to function the way it needs to, potentially because they weren't checking out, well, who's
Mhm.
around this piece all the time? What
Mhm.
is it saying to them? But also, if it becomes too kind of a basic piece and it doesn't have that intellectual rigor, that's a hard balance to hit. It could be seen by artists as like, oh, this is fluff.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and that's another thing, like when you want to know who's using your site, like take some images out. It doesn't have, even if it's you don't know what the work is going to be, but like take some images of your workout or take like some sketches or, you know, even like, yeah, different textures of things that you're thinking about. Like just show them to people that are sitting on the bench or playing with their kid. Like they'll tell you what they think, and you're going to get really incredible feedback that might inform or might not, you know, but you will at least have taken them on the journey a little bit.
Oh,
Um,
that is so smart, I think, to be doing that. And it just helps you with your idea. It's like we have an
mhm.
idea of what people might want, and then that's not actually the case, you know, when you're in
Yeah,
a specific space that has different populations coming together, you know.
totally.
Oh,
But I think that's why, and again, I'm going to like hugely generalize here. I think that's why sometimes there is so much bad public art because, you know, it's public art too. We haven't talked about the financial aspect. It's incredibly expensive to put something outside. It's incredibly expensive to get something, have drawings stamped by an engineer. I mean, it's not incredibly expensive. There's a lot of money. You need a lot of money. And I think sometimes that people see big dollar signs and a lot of money gets thrown around, and um, things get co-opted for a different message or a different politic, and maybe some of that community voice gets lost. Maybe some, like a lot of times the artist voice, I think, gets really lost. You know, don't forget that sometimes, you know, if you're, how should I say this? For instance, I think, you know, a city can get really excited and start saying like, you should, I think, you know, no matter what I'm saying, you need to stay true to your vision as an artist. It's very easy for things to get co-opted by other visions. And that's how you kind of run up against, you know, projects that get really diluted. I think too, like just going back to what we were talking about before and like image culture in general, like we are in a moment where we're so saturated by images, and companies, brands, like they're using images as never before. You know, advertisements are on murals. I think it's on one hand, we're so sophisticated and we can kind of parse out what we're being quote unquote sold in an image, but at the same time, there's so many images, it's harder and harder to kind of like stand out and have that presence. So I don't really have good advice for this, besides that I think it's just a conversation that we need to keep having. I mean, certainly now and there, the triennial, they're having that conversation. There are, you know, Creative Time in New York. There are a lot of people that are thinking about this in a really exciting way. So I think in general, having more and more conversations about what kind of public art we want and how we want, you know, as artists or curators to engage with that work and steward that work, that'll help us.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important what you said too. And it's something I think about often as an artist and with Instagram, is just how image saturated we are, you know, and it's to market to us. Capitalism is like really, you know, part of that.
Yeah.
And because of those things, it can make it harder and harder for public artists in a way, you know. And I think that's so interesting. Like I love that we have more images, but also at the same time, I think it harms artists, like you were saying. So there's this
Or it can.
crazy,
Yeah.
like conversation there. That's kind of thrilling too. In a way.
It is. That's what I mean. And like, I would love to, you know, at PAFA, we have there's 2 buildings, there's amazing, quote unquote, interstitial spaces. There's a lot of potential for artists to interact and engage with the surfaces in and around those 2 buildings and the publics. I mean, we're right in downtown Philly. We have a lot of different communities that go by our building. At the same time, I also like to think about, we are one of the, there's also, you know, the Fabric Workshop here in Philly, that's a museum that has a nice storefront, but we are, you know, you can be walking down Broad Street in Center City, Philadelphia, and then, you know, 500 feet later be in a gallery looking at really provocative contemporary art in our doors. So I like to think of us as a storefront museum as well.
Oh, that is incredible. And Philly is just such a wonderful city. And I'm thrilled that you're there, kind of leading this space and being involved with so much, you know, there in Philly. And
Trying.
Yeah, trying. Yeah. Well, you're doing all the things. And I think they're really lucky to have you there as a curator and a writer. Leah, this has been wonderful. Can you share with everybody like where we can find you online?
You can find me on Instagram. Do you want me to say my handle?
Yeah. Give us your handle, and
it's going to be a hard one to remember. It's just my name, Leah_Triplett. And I'm very accessible there. If you write me a note on Instagram, I will probably write you back. It might take me a little bit. So there's that. And I don't have a website, which everyone tells me that I need to get, but I just cannot spend time doing that.
Only so many hours in the day, right?
There's only so many hours a day. You know, recent writings on, I just had a piece come out in the Brooklyn Rail. I just started writing for a publication called Publications. Stir World is one, Impulse Magazine is one. I'll have pieces coming out in there in a couple weeks. And yeah, certainly you can go to the PAFA website, pafa.org. and find out what we'll be unveiling pretty soon, part of which is this big reinstallation project we're working on.
Oh, it is so incredibly exciting. And everybody, we will put those links in the show notes. We'll also be tagging Leah over on Instagram over I Like Your Work podcast, so we can easily get you connected with her. And again, I just want to say thank you, Leah. This has just been such an incredible conversation. I've truly, truly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. You are such a treat to talk to, and thank you to everyone listening. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.